Kelp forests are pretty special because they bring a lot of life into an area. As you can see, lots and lots of little species hanging out in the kelp forests. It also has some pretty cool environmental effects. It really dampens wave action. It can mitigate nutrients in some environments. So we really want to ensure that these areas are around for a long period of time. My name is Logan Zinert. I am a researcher at North Island College in the Center for Applied Research, Technology and Innovation. Today we are going just outside of Campbell River, right beside Quadra Island. We're collecting the kelp sori, and then we are going to use that kelp to create commercial kelp spools or use for restoration. So typically we can collect that kelp from mid-August is when we start to see the reproductive tissue to sometime in November.
Bull kelp's easy to identify. You'll see the big bulb floating on the surface with the blades trailing behind it in the current. Yeah, this is a nice patch over here. Fantastic. The nice thing about collecting kelp sori is it's something that everyone can do. I don't have any fancy equipment. I just have like a gaff or anything kind of similar to this, just to be able to pull the kelp out of the water pretty easily. And I have a knife and I have a cooler that just has a couple of ice packs in it just to keep the kelp cool as we collect throughout the day and as we transport it back to the lab as well. So the equipment is fairly basic and the method is fairly easy as well. So all I'm doing is finding a nice piece of kelp that's nice and clean. This is a nice size one right here, which is fantastic. And I'm just looking through these blades to find a nice piece of this reproductive tissue. So it's generally like a nice chocolatey color, kind of like that, which is fantastic. And then we're just cutting that tissue out of the blade. So it's easy just to cut across the blade. And then we just trim off the excess kelp blade. So we're left with a nice little patch like that. And if there's any like green algae and other species that are left on it, we can just wipe those off or just rinse them in the water. And then we just put that into our cooler. And when we get back to the lab, we'll just clean that off a little bit more. So we're not too worried about it being super clean right now. I'm looking to do that with 50 different plants. So this is still the same plant, but I do like to get a couple of pieces per plant. So quite often I end up with 80 to 100 different pieces of sori.
So there are some guidelines and best practices around where to collect your kelp sori. So typically in BC we have the 50-50 rule, which is 50 kilometers from your outplanting site and 50 parent individuals. So the 50 individuals allows us to get a good genetic diversity on our farm. And that means that if that kelp on our farm becomes reproductive and it also releases the sorus patches and the spores into the marine environment, that we are not creating a genetic bottleneck in kelp sites around our farm. That one's quite a good one. It's quite dark and it's got like that white margin around it, which is kind of indicative that it's getting close to releasing this patch out of the bull kelp. They float around in the environment and then release the spores, and that's how they disperse themselves. This one came out really nice and easy, and you can see it's quite patchy throughout. So that one might actually be releasing some sorus tissue right now. So as I'm looking around here, we can see lots of green algae growing on the top of the bull kelp bulbs, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We just don't want that on any of the blades because that's where our sorus tissue is going to be found. Okay, so this piece of kelp right here, we're starting to see
some of the Bryozoan growth on it. So all of these little circles, this is Bryozoan, which is a fouling species. And what this does is it really adds a lot of weight to the kelp blades, and then those kelp blades become brittle as the bryozoan grows on it, and they start to break away and fracture away, and that's part of the process of your kelp getting towards the end of its life. So we do try to avoid these ones because it can indicate that there's going to be some fouling species. One of the things I'm also doing as I'm collecting this kelp sori is I'm moving from one end of the bed along the bed to the other end, and that allows me to collect a variety of sori patches from a variety of different individuals rather than just one cluster that might be at the end. And I'm also thinking about the size of the bed too. So if my bed's quite small, I might collect 15 to 20 individuals from that bed and then move to another bed and collect the rest, or maybe 2 or 3 different beds, and that way I'm able to ensure that those beds are still able to provide reproductive tissue to the environment as well.
I'm Kevin Romanen. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst with Fisheries and Aquaculture, and I'm with the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. The provincial government is responsible for the regulation of aquatic plants in BC, and that includes licensing wild harvest of aquatic plants and licensing aquaculture. There's also licensing for provincial processing. We also provide Land Act tenures for all aquaculture activities. Anytime you're going to be taking wild aquatic plants, you will need a wild harvest license, whether that's going to be for commercial purposes or to later be used in aquaculture. And anytime you're doing aquaculture activities with aquatic plants, you'll need an aquaculture license. So anytime you need an aquatic plant license, whether it's wild harvest or aquaculture, you apply through Front Counter BC, and those applications are put to the right decision makers for moving those applications forward. In determining how much kelp can be taken from any given area, the province is responsible for ensuring that all the cumulative effects are taken into account, any local factors. As well, we make sure to consult with any local First Nations in the area to make sure that any data, information they have on the kelp beds, any traditional knowledge is being considered as part of the harvest levels and limits that we put in each area.
I'm Rhiannon Nagel, the manager for the Center for Applied Research Technology and Innovation at North Island College. CARTI is located on the territories of the Lakota people, and in particularly the Wewakai, Wewakam, and Kuyaka First Nations. The Center for Applied Research Technology and Innovation is part of North Island College, and we share a common goal of creating accessible and relevant learning opportunities in our region. And we feel very proud to be able to offer the expertise and infrastructure for learning, research, and innovation to our community. CARTI supports and leads research and innovation with First Nations, industry, community organizations, and government at different levels. And our focus is often on, in an ecologically sound way, supporting the economic and social development of the North Island. All of our projects include a focus on sharing knowledge and information with the community around us. So we're consistently learning from the community that we work with, but also making sure that whatever we learn in our research and innovation projects goes back to the community so that it can be used for the purposes it was intended. Alongside our partners in community, CARTI has developed a Seaweed Innovation Hub. And this hub aims to bring together cutting-edge equipment, cross-sector expertise, and relevant training for businesses and organizations who are wanting to learn more about sori collection and processing. We offer hands-on support in our lab. We also offer hands-on support at the site where individuals are working.
We are back in the lab and we have our kelp sori right here. And now I'm just setting up to process that kelp sori, remove the excess tissue from that sori, and then clean it. So it's nice and clean when we do our sori release, and we minimize the amount of contamination that we get. So all I need for this is paper towels, a nice cutting board and a knife, and I need bleach and iodine, as well as some nice cool water and a couple of ice packs just to keep this cool. Here we have our iodine, 40 mils, and 500 mils of salt water. We then have our rinse station, which is salt water, and that's just to clean the iodine off it. We then have our 40 mils of bleach and our 500 mils of salt water. And then we have another rinse station to rinse the bleach off. And then we have our desiccating tray. So the desiccating area is just layers of paper towel. So we're just gonna lie our Sori pieces in here. And then when this layer gets full, we just put a layer of paper towel over and repeat the process, adding layers of Sori and layers of paper towel until we get all the way to the top. Now, more chilled water to the little bins surrounding each of these. And then to these bins, I'm just gonna add a couple of ice packs, and that will just help keep the water temperature cool for a longer period of time. So ideally, we're trying to keep our kelp at around 10 to 12 degrees, and that way it's not getting too warm and damaging the Sori. So this process of cleaning is to decontaminate as much as we can the Sori that we have collected while we're out on the boat. So our iodine and our bleach is really trying to remove as much of the contamination and fouling species that you see growing on the kelp as much as we can. And then this step right here, where we're cutting the Sori and manually cleaning it with paper towels, that's gonna be what really removes a lot of it. We have our nice piece of Sori, and then we're just gonna trim around the edges and remove the excess kelp blade. And these pieces that look a little funky, we can just cut off. And then we are doing our mechanical cleaning step with paper towel. Nice clean piece. We're just rubbing down source tissue. And that mucus layer is where a lot of the fouling and contamination is quite often found. And then I just like to cut these up a little bit. They're easy to work with. And then we just go into our iodine for about 15 to 20 seconds. Give it a quick rinse. Then it goes into our bleach for 15 to 20 seconds. Gets a rinse. While it's in there, we set up our first paper towel. Which goes on the bottom here. Take these guys out. And we just lay them on the paper towel like that. And we start again. The idea is to get the source tissue out of the kelp itself, and that way you're just minimizing the amount of kelp tissue that's in there, and the risk of contamination is reduced alongside that. If I'm doing a larger piece, I will just cut both of the ends off here and get a nice chunk like this. And a lot of this color that you're seeing on the board here is already the kelp releasing Sori, so that's a really good sign for our processing step. And as you see me wipe this, you'll probably see a lot of color come out of this kelp. So my cutting board is getting a little bit dirty, so I'm gonna go and give this a rinse, and then I'm gonna do a few more pieces, and that'll just help us minimize contamination. Okay, so we have processed all of our kelp, and by that I mean we have cut the excess off, we have mechanically cleaned it to remove the bulk of the fouling organisms and mucus, and then we have gone through our iodine and bleach steps to thoroughly disinfect it and remove any microbial growth or organisms that are there. We have our kelp Sori now lightly placed on some paper towels. I'm gonna put this last little cover over here, and this is gonna be our desiccation step. So we're gonna put this in the fridge at about 12 degrees, and this is gonna sit overnight, so between 18 and 24 hours is a good place to start. And this is going to dry out, and that is going to stress the kelp a little bit, and then it's going to promote the release of the sori. So let's get this into the fridge.